It is the Anfield wrap, a Sunday Anfield wrap. As Liverpool played 12:30, you might have heard somebody talk about that sort of thing on occasions. It is Neil Atkinson. I've got Neil Docking. I've got Steve Graves. I've got Ali McGovern, all to talk about, first and foremost, Liverpool against Brighton. Brighton 1, Liverpool 1. In case you don't know, I'm sure you do. The price of admittance is knowing the scoreline. Talking about the injuries in general and looking ahead to Ajax. When I say pick me a team, what I actually mean is list the fit players and work out where they'll stand. But anyway, Brighton 1, Liverpool 1. And the first part of it, Neil Docking, is the sheer frustration with the very end. Liverpool find themselves 1-0 up, moving into injury time. And I've actually kept Brighton at bay reasonably well in the second half. The frustration of the very end is absolutely huge, at least for me.
Yeah, it was. I was livid, as I'm sure many listeners were. There's few things sweeter in football than like a really hard-fought win away from home, when you know you're about to come home with those delicious, beautiful 3 points, those 3 points that you've dreamt of since kickoff. And it felt like we'd done all the hard work, and it was just going to be a really good result, top of the table, put some good distance again between us and City and the chasing pack. And it's all undone. And the VAR, it's so tiresome, isn't it? The continuous debate around VAR. I'm sorry to listeners who must be sick of it, because I'm sick of it. And I think, if Jay McKenna was here now, I'm sure he'd tell me there's a tweet from 3 years ago where I said VAR was fantastic. But currently, I'm of the opinion that I hate it. And the thing I hate about it is the implementation of it. And we're in a position now where they're talking on air about, has the guidance been amended? Has there been a softening of the approach? And that sort of talk around the rules of the game being altered midway through a match really sticks in my craw.
The implementation of it, I am going to repeatedly use the phrase video assistant referee through this. And one of the reasons why is because sometimes when you actually, acronyms end up with an identity that's separate than the thing that they are meant to be the initials thereof. And it's a video assistant referee on this one, Ali. And we find ourselves in a situation where that's the bit that sort of just keeps getting forgotten. We're acting as though VAR is some sort of thing in the sky that just sort of comes over, like it's almost got a supernatural power on its own agenda, whereas it's all being done by humans. And in this instance, I was just, the phraseology that's being used since the outset is clear and obvious. And it's clear and obvious within this that drives me mad, because it didn't look to me like anybody on the pitch at least thought there was something clear and obvious that needed to be looked at.
Yeah, you might have noticed that I just had to bob down there because I was plugging my laptop in because it would ping to tell me that it was about to run out of power, which just goes to show that even in these days of AI and extremely sensitive bits of technology, it is really human error that is at the heart of things going wrong. And for me, I think that I actually sort of slightly disagree with some of the frustrations with the video assistant referee. I think we have to separate out the bits. So there is the bit that can measure very precisely a line and tell us whether a thing is touching that line, across that line, squarely on that. There is that bit of technology. And I don't think that using that in football is particularly a problem. Saying whether or not something is a goal, I might get shot down in place with this, but I think using that technology to say something is or isn't a goal is relatively straightforward. And I think what Neil was saying about maybe Steve having a tweet from 3 years ago of him saying it was great, I think maybe people were sort of after that I think that has clearly something to offer the game outside all of the current frustrations, like the use of technology to measure a thing that is binary seems to me to be unproblematic. I think the issue we've got is that we're using video to involve more human judges of rules that are not binary. And what I worry about is that, the rules of football should be quite simple, and then you require match officials, and I know we hate talking about referees and I completely agree with that, but you require match officials by and large to interpret them, to learn about how to interpret them as they go along, to use their judgment and their common sense. and you can't make that binary. And so I think that's where we've got into a problem with football, because we're not going, oh, like, it's great, we can use modern technology and lasers or whatever to measure things that are clearly either or. We've created this whole package of technology, some of which just involves even more human judgment. And we've actually, in doing so, and trying to make it more clear, we've made the rules of the game more complex. And that's making it hard for the players, and it's making it harder for the crowd. So I think they need to kind of like walk it back a bit and say, let's exercise a test that if this technology is being used for something where it is a clear improvement on the human eye, then that's fine. If this technology is being used for something that is a matter of interpretation and judgment, then what recent experience shows is that it's probably not a road we want to go down.
The process with all of it, Steve, I'll say again, it did seem like a surprise to everyone. And as Ali's phrased that there, around the it seemed like something the referee had seen, noted, and moved past within the context of the football match that was happening before his very eyes. And then all of a sudden, it's decided this is something that needs to be investigated. And I'm talking about the penalty. I'll come back on the offsides in a minute or two, because even there's a little bit more elasticity than we might actually want. But at least you can see there comes a point where you could get the technology so it's absolutely spot on for offsides. But with this, it just seems to me as though it had all looked remarkably innocuous. And then it becomes a thing. And by it becoming a thing, it will have to therefore logically almost prove to be enough of a thing. There was no point from which the television camera cut to possible VAR on this thing that was almost just irrelevant to the football match that was happening, where as soon as I saw that, I thought this is going to get given. And that to me, therefore, doesn't suggest necessarily an entirely decent process, that you've effectively decided the result of any given review in these instances before the review itself has taken place. And that's what drove me absolutely mad. And as I say, if there had been a load of players surrounding the referee saying you've got to look at that, then that'd make sense to me. But that really doesn't happen. You don't see the Brighton players react at all. And that's where, and maybe we're focusing on the wrong words here, but this is where clear and obvious becomes a massive problem.
Yeah, it's all about the process by which the decision is looked at again. The sort of the established principle way, if a referee has seen an incident, then retrospective punishment doesn't necessarily come into play. I feel like that's a little bit more fluid than it used to be as well. But there was that sort of accepted thing that the referee had seen it and made his judgment, and maybe that's just something to put in place here, where VAR says, "Did you see that?" And if the referee says, "Yeah, I saw that, and I felt that this is what happened," there's a higher bar then for VAR to be involved. I mean, the difficulty, of course, it's the sort of fast nature of football and the fact that it has to move on, whereas in some other sports, they're much better suited to having a few minutes even to go through something, although we've obviously seen that in football a few times where that's gone on far too long. I think it is a penalty once they look at it. There isn't really a way they can not give it. Andy Robertson's point is pointing at the ball after, if you sort of, there's one replay that runs on a little bit longer, and he's doing the sort of pointing at the ball thing. So I think Robertson is aware that he's made contact, not with the ball, because that's why he's pointing at it, as is often the way. So I don't think I think if that just gets given in real time and gets confirmed by VAR, there is less of a sour taste afterwards. I think one big thing that again I've been a big advocate for is them not showing the decision-making process. As with say Champions League, where it just happens and the referee has the conversation with the person who tells them what he thinks, and they seem to come to a decision together rather than the VAR being this ultimate overlord that we cut to. Because as you say, I mean, the word assistant referee, or that it is there to assist in decision making rather than to be this ultimate arbiter that just goes, no, this is what happened and this is the decision you have to give. I think Jamie Carragher tweeted that he had heard the process happen, and it is essentially VAR say, this is what happened, it's a penalty, but go and look at the screen anyway, kind of thing, rather than you might want to have a look at this on the screen, which feels like a flawed system and a flawed approach. Overall, I mean, I've been a big advocate for the idea that VAR is a positive thing, is as an idea, and it's purely implementation that has been so frustrating, and it is having the effect of changing the rules of the game and changing how how people approach the game rather than implementing them and rather than enforcing them. And that isn't how it was intended and isn't how it should be put in place. And the problem you have is, as Neil said, is that I think last season we saw it kind of got better through the season as things start to change, but that is the definition of not a level playing field. And that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a Liverpool thing. I think there'll be plenty of time when it is the detriment of other sides, and it just ends up with everyone all the time frustrated, and that isn't really what the enterprise is meant to be about.
Just to come back to you on that before we get on to what the enterprise is meant to be about. By that I also mean literally the football match itself. Sorry?
10% of it is meant to be everyone being frustrated all the time, I suppose.
Yeah. On that, Steve, I think one of the things here is I think if there's a world where, for instance, the referee could be saying to the VAR, can you have a look at that for me, please, rather than the idea that the VAR is this thing. Because I think one of the things about this is the psychology of the notion is this thing that's just constantly running under the game that can influence the game at any moment that we can't see. So if it was, for instance, the referee was to say to the VAR, I'm not sure about that there, Henderson, Robertson and Welbeck, can you have a little look at it, please? If you thought that was the process, but it isn't the process, the VAR runs constantly under the game, almost like this shadow life that we've got no real grasp of or where it's going to lead us next. I think that's difficult. But I also think, to go back to your point about once you look at it, it is just a bit of a foul. I'm sort of all right with that, as I say. If the referee looks at it, feels like it's a bit of a foul and he's going to give it, that's absolutely fine. But there's unbelievable amounts of contact in the penalty area after the ball has gone in almost every game of football. And if what we're saying is any given contact in the penalty area, so the example I always use is when players are about to get a shot away, they get the shot away and someone absolutely clatters them. And it's almost like I've been saying for years, it almost feels unfair anyway, that it feels like you can do anything to a player if they're about to shoot and everyone will just go afterwards. Well, that's fine because you got a shot away. And all Welbeck's doing it, Welbeck in the same language, Steve, he gets his touch away. It's not a good touch. It's a touch that just falls to a Liverpool player in the same way those shots sometimes just go for goal kicks. It's not a good thing, but he gets his touch away in the penalty area. And if we're going to be retrospectively looking at any contact in the penalty area after the players kick the ball, then it's out of control. And I'm sure if I went back through Brighton versus Liverpool, which I don't want to do, I could find another 3 or 4 instances around set pieces or something where there's contact after someone's touched the ball.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a good point. I mean, I think this is not necessarily a VAR thing. It's been a football thing, since forever, really, is if something happens after the ball has gone or if there isn't going to be a chance, is there a slightly higher bar then for what should result? And obviously there's always been that if that was somewhere else on the pitch, it would have been a free kick. Has been something you get used to as sort of contextual refereeing. VAR kind of totally overturns that, but then it doesn't get rid of contextual refereeing. The amount of times, and it doesn't apply in this situation, but the amount of times where just because the ball hasn't really gone out of play, you feel like something doesn't get reviewed. You feel it just because it stays in play for a couple of minutes. Yeah. Then things don't get looked at. And I mean, again, VAR, they're as human as anyone. If they're just watching it in real time,
they are human, yes.
Different angles, and they've only still got their own in the moment interpretation and their own in the moment decision making process. Whether to decide to call a review. But I think they need to appreciate that once they say there's a review, they are overturning the decision effectively now. And that either that has to change or it has to be recognised and it has to happen less, which is like it was sort of between the Merseyside derby and the international break, and then we kind of come back and started to see it happening again. I'm not sure.
I was just going to say, that was exactly my point before. Like, basically, you need to, if there's stuff where people are applying judgment, then that's a whole separate question to stuff that's just binary. And the development of the game has been about a simple set of rules that are interpreted on the pitch with experience by human beings who learn through that experience to express their judgment. That is understood also by players. And I think the human judgment behind it is where people have been sort of basically sold a technological solution to stuff that's binary, whereas actually what we've got is human judgment behind it. And Neil, what you're saying before about maybe we just have to understand that this is a thing that sits beneath it. Well, if that is true, then something needs to be put in the rules of the game about that. And we're in a cricket situation where it is part of the competitive play, how many times something is reviewed, and that's where I think the way this has been rolled out it's not been well thought and logically like put together so that people really understand where there has actually been a change in the rules or where the technology is being used to pursue the exact application of the rules as they already existed.
I just think it's a real concern if the game and incidents are being re-refereed, if it's not a case of the video assistant referee assisting, if that second referee is actually making a determination, as Steve put, making a determination of an incident and then saying, this is what's happened, do you agree? Then that's taken away from the referee on the pitch. And we were told that wouldn't happen. So it's such a fundamental change to what we thought we were getting. And we've not even talked about, the offside situation and how unbelievably frustrating it is when things that you can't see with a naked eye are being ruled offside by a toe or, the edge of a foot on a picture that looks like it's been drawn up on Microsoft Paint. On this really low quality pixelated image, and someone's got their geometry set and are working out the line on Salah's foot. That to me, that just drives me absolutely fucking mental. Like I'm annoyed about the penalty, but I can't tell you how annoyed I am about these offsides. When Bobby Firmino has juggled the ball and then deliciously chipped it forward for like one of the assists of the season, and Salah scored a really good goal, and then you watch the replay, and to the naked eye, it's level, isn't it? It's level. Salah's looked across, he's level. A linesman would say he was level, but that goal's being taken away from us. I mean, that just, I don't know, it drives me mad. Even the Mane one, which is clearly offside, I think I've come to the view that I much prefer goals that are erroneous being allowed to stand than I enjoy goals being taken away.
I think genuinely on the Mane one, like I think Mane knows he's offside immediately afterwards. I think, in all honesty, if there isn't the video assistant referee process, the line just puts his flag up.
Yeah,
he was offside there. It's offside. Yeah. But now he's now.
Instead we get the celebration, don't we? We get all the joy and the prolonged. My son came into the room. He's 3. He stood next to me, about 80 minutes. And I said, Liverpool are winning. He said, the Reds. We like the Reds. I said, yeah, we do like the Reds.
They are good.
And then we score. Mane scores, and I lift him up and celebrate with him and went crazy. And he was dead excited. He's got a massive grin on his face. He's bounced up and down. And it dawned on me, this is the first Liverpool goal I've ever celebrated with my son, like properly celebrated. And I thought, what a moment. This is like an amazing moment I'll always remember. And then it got chalked off. And it was offside, but I just sort of feel that in a nutshell is the kind of joy of football, the beauty of football, and how it's being tampered with in a way that I find just deeply upsetting, really.
The final part of this, and it's worth saying, it will, and last season it does happen to other teams an awful lot around VAR. Liverpool at the minute, all the charts have Liverpool top of the VAR hard lines chart, Ali. It feels at the minute like a very, very tough run of those VAR decisions. And simultaneously, I think it comes with the injuries. And that all in is, it's not nice watching the footballers that you love on the deck in pain and with vexed expressions, etc., etc. And clearly the players around them with huge concern, the manager with huge concern. Before you get to any other bit, the sort of the emotional reaction of that and the VAR, it's leaving people, I think, just feeling really just quite negative about the 90 minutes plus half time of football they've just watched, feeling pretty drained by it, and without the sort of release that they want. It's, and what I'm saying is that it's just making people a bit miserable at the minute, and there's other reasons to be miserable.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, in a way, I hate talking about refereeing, and I really hate talking about VAR. I think it's really annoying and boring that we've got ourselves into this position. But I think it also, I'm not surprised that Jurgen Klopp was in the situation that he was in the post-match discussion, because actually the thing that when nobody's really talking about is like the schedule and how challenging that is, because there's some really, really difficult things to balance, because this isn't just about players being tired. This isn't just about like, it's always hard before Christmas. You've got a significant run of games. You're still in all the competitions. It's really hard. People are tired. This is about actual injury. And we don't, I don't know all of the detail of the post kind of first lockdown consequences for the fitness of the footballers or the expected impact, on them of that. But, if you contrast the way that football is with something like athletics or tennis, where it's hard for people. They train, then they have a very limited opportunity to kind of do their thing at the top point of peak fitness. The footballers in the main are trying to maintain at quite an extreme now level of fitness over a really long period of time.
Yeah.
And, that I think that we should all be worried about actual injury to the footballers. And obviously you can counteract that by squad depth to a certain extent, but then you've got to balance like risk of injury with squad depth and the impact of that on the cohesion of the team. And, we're seeing in real time what happens when you have injury. So you're switching in players who are not used to playing with players who haven't got that mental knowledge. So I think the impact that the COVID lockdown had is quite big, and we don't necessarily acknowledge it anymore. We just think, oh, football's back, it's fine. And I think actually it has had an impact on the way that they have been able to train over the past year and the impact on the footballers. But also, I think that the schedule does have a massive impact, and I think that's not going to be a question that goes away. I mean, I would say that the flip side of that is what goes on in the women's game, where frankly, trying to predict when there might or might not be a game of women's football is it's like the problem in reverse, right? It's like you've got footballers who don't know how to be fit for an unpredictable series of matches that may or may not come at any point. So schedule is a massive thing for the way that athletes train in general. And I think this is the real question. It's like, how many games are we having and when are we playing them? Because that matters for how to win. And whether you've got the problem in the men's game where everyone wants to play Liverpool just all the time, and therefore teams like us, how do you deal with that? Or whether you've got the problem in the women's game, which is like still desperately fighting to have an actual predictable schedule that actually happens when it has said it will happen. Like, this is the big question, I think, over the next few years.
Ali there, Steve, mentions tiredness, the idea that this isn't tiredness. But the one thing that is in there is that there is elements of players being worn out as well. And what's annoyed me with the discourse, and still annoys me with the discourse around people criticising what the manager says, is that they're acting as though in some way, shape or form, his team isn't showing an unbelievable level of resilience, determination, and finding wells of mental and physical strength to get through this. Whereas one of the reasons why the late incident drove me as mad as it did was, yes, Liverpool were absolutely abject first half, but they dug so deep second half and have put themselves in a position in the match where they were going to come away with all 3 points. As Neil says, it would have felt like a very old school, quite Houllier. We've got this one out, lads. We all carry it home with us. We carry those 3 points aloft. I would have an open top bus tour for these 3 points sort of result. And yet the manager is spoken to as though, well, you just need to get on with it. Where he'd be well within his rights to be screaming, well, look at them. They're obviously getting on with it. They are obviously getting on with it. These lads are absolute heroes. And that's what I've found difficult with the discourse, difficult with the way the wider sort of football world's decided to respond, is that it's decided it's going to patronise this Liverpool side who've shown more guts and more determination than any football team I've ever seen and are still doing that.
Yeah, and people are sort of desperate to reach for the idea that this is excuses. Well, excuses. I mean, Liverpool, even with a draw, went top of the league yesterday.
Yeah,
they're all but qualified in the Champions League, touch wood. But Liverpool they're not. The manager is not seeking to make excuses for a bad run of results, because Liverpool haven't had a bad run of results. Liverpool
absolutely
have had a good start by any standards, just not by their own. Liverpool are handily placed to do anything they want to this season. And in a few weeks' time, all being well, Liverpool may well be in a position where 6-7 players come back, and other sides are maybe just a little bit later going into this having this kind of level of injury. The manager, he's of course there is a degree of self-interest. I mean, if you expect the Liverpool manager to speak on behalf of Liverpool and want what will serve Liverpool best, I mean that's literally his job, and a big part of his job is to do that. But there's also the interest of just the product, for want of a better word, and what it is that we're watching, and whether you want to tune into Manchester United v Arsenal or whatever sort of game might appeal to you as a neutral, and which footballers you want to see playing. Even if you're barring people who really, really despise Liverpool, I think there's quite a lot of people who've really enjoyed watching us in the last few years, and a big part of that, has been seeing the fullbacks at full tilt, flying down the flanks, and seeing Mane, Salah, Firmino at their absolute best, and knowing that your own team then goes up against that, and if they can beat that Liverpool team, then that's great, and I think the whole it seems like there is a kind of combination of factors that's all come together to make everyone forget what the product is. Perhaps because we were all a little bit happy to have it back, and we're all sort of focused on things like fans coming back, and none of this is easy. But like, what are the Euros going to look like if we're going through the season like this? With players dropping like flies, and players, probably coming under pressure from their clubs to effectively be injured for that tournament. I think because just literally to give them a break and a pre-season and a chance. I think that will put players in difficult positions, and it will devalue that competition, and it will devalue the Champions League, and it devalues every aspect of it, really, to not have the best footballers available, and not just available, but at their absolute best. I mean, it's not just physical fitness, it's not just injuries, and it's not just sort of tiredness in their legs. It's just that focus and ability, and that 1% extra sharpness to pick a pass, or to anticipate something coming their way. It all just drops a little bit when you are tired and you haven't had that pre-season. Even Liverpool's ability to, with a minute and a half left, I thought Liverpool could still win the game. And then when we get it forward, there's just a point when I think if Jota just is able to control the ball, but he's just out on his feet. And that's one of Liverpool's players who we have been able to sort of give a little bit of a gentle introduction to, because the other three forwards have been fit, and he's actually been able to sit out a couple of games and start off the bench. And that's someone, again, who's been lightly raced compared to some of the others, and you can just see it. You can see it in Wijnaldum's, last 20 minutes, where he's
very much so
digging deep as if it's the Champions League final in with 10 minutes to go, rather than an early season game away at Brighton.
The lineup then from the outset and the way the first half goes, Ali, it's hard to be Neco Williams, and I want to start this conversation there. It's also harder. It's hard to be Neco Williams and be the person who comes in for Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is also a young fullback who's come through the youth ranks. He just happens to have become very quickly one of the best players in the world, if not possibly even the best in his position. So it's hard to be Neco Williams for that. It's harder again to be Neco Williams in an injury-disrupted side. And especially then when you end up next to Nat Phillips, who needs some looking after as well, and when you've got Minamino in front of you. My point about all of this is that Neco only gets the first half, and I think he struggles hugely. But there's loads of reasons why. And in the past, we'd have found ways possibly to be a bit more patient with this footballer, and circumstances making that a lot harder.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that he's got a huge amount going for him, but I think that all of the things that we know are going to essentially put at risk the kind of development that players like Williams would have had in years gone by, whether it's literally just the impact of having gone through that lockdown and that interruption to contact with training staff, or whether it's the manner in which he's coming into the side. I think that is really hard for him. I think that we forget as well how much players on the pitch kind of coach each other in real time, and how much that will have an impact on your point about what was going on between the two of the less experienced players. I think is an important one. I guess what I wonder is, does this get better actually? Because as he gets more experience, he's not going to be Trent. So does this get better as he gets to be Neco Williams? Does that get better because he gets to do his own thing? And I think that even though he clearly didn't obviously have the best of games, and there's been examples, I think he's obviously a decent player, and you wonder if he's got other things that are available to him, and this maybe in a year's time we look back on this period and we're like, that's when he really stepped up a gear. I still think that's available. So I don't think anybody should be hard on him.
I think the issue, Neil, from the outset, it wasn't necessarily Phillips or Williams with the team selection. It's Phillips and Williams. It's the pair of them. And the week before against Leicester, we turned the right back area into a strength. We were targeted by Leicester, and Milner ran the game from there. But Milner's Milner, and I think what then happens is that we just couldn't do it again. And the next phase of that as well is I thought that you watched Neco lose faith in himself over the course of the first half, and also the players around him. I thought stopped involving him as much, looked at him as a dummy runner rather than a viable option on the ball, and it all just began, I think, just to go a bit wrong for Liverpool from there and from that right hand side. Despite the fact, as I say, I think over the 90 minutes, I think Phillips plays that perfectly well.
Yeah, I agree. And the opposition soon suss that out, don't they? That if you're reluctant to use someone, the ball's not going to be shifted over to his flank. I think what's disappointing is when he first came into the team, I know it was in a different context. It was in, League Cup games and FA Cup ties, but he looked really confident. And he looked like a player who was more than willing to just run to the byline and put a cross in like he did for Origi, the goal against Arsenal in the Anfield. He looked to me, as the half wore on, increasingly like nervous and just cautious and just wanting to just play a simple ball and not be part of the build-up, not be part of the attacking play. And I know he's come in for a lot of criticism on social media. I'm sure that kind of helped. He's had a lot of abuse from certain elements of our support. And he's now in a very different situation. He's not being brought in as a young player who's added to this fully functioning, well-oiled unit, this Liverpool machine. As you say, he's part of a back line which is makeshift right the way. Other than the left back, it's an entirely makeshift back line. And he's got a lad next to him who's willing to head, kick, boot, throw his body in the line of everything. But he's not really going to play football. He's not going to build in the back and support him in terms of building play, Phillips. And especially at times at the start of that half when they were finding Connolly with such ease and turning us round, and we were having to drop deeper and deeper, which is obviously then impacting on the midfield. It was quite disjointed, wasn't it? And it was just, it's difficult to watch at the moment because you know how many wonderful footballers we have and how many absences we have, and you're not getting to see the real Liverpool. You're not getting to see the champions, the sort of team we've been accustomed to. And I think you need to bear that in mind and sort of judge everything in that context. I was really proud, if that's the right word, of the effort of the team yesterday, the collective effort, because they really are facing a lot of adversity. I mean, Milner, as you say, does a really good job at right back against Leicester, but then because of the situation, we're forced to redeploy him in midfield. And there's a lot of square pegs in round holes.
Neil mentions it there, Steve, obviously. The Connolly, Liverpool start well, but Brighton do take control. Up until arguably when they win the pen and miss it, and then Salah suddenly has his goal disallowed, all that sort of happens relatively close together. And from there, it seems like almost both sides wanted half-time. I think, within that, it's what makes it more complicated for Williams is that he's left in a situation where Neil there talks about putting crosses in, but the one thing Liverpool may well have had a chat about, certainly from the right-hand side before the match, is don't just lump the ball into the box. They're playing 4 centre-backs. So you're sort of taking these options away and you're saying we need you to be part of build and play, and nothing settled and nothing looked right. So there is this inevitability of it being, disjointed and there being individuals who aren't quite right. And I think that huge credit to the team and the manager is that second half, so much of that's fixed. Liverpool, it's night and day between the first half struggles and the second half struggles. Just in terms of solidity and shape, Liverpool don't suddenly become a free-flowing outfit, but they solve a lot of their problems on the pitch really impressively.
Yeah, it does go from, Brighton seemingly able to sort of spring the defensive will and get in, and then to a point where you just can't see where Brighton's goal is going to come from, and then it comes. The line in the first half at times was just comically bad, just really, really poor. But again, what would you expect? There isn't Van Dijk, there isn't Gomez, there isn't Alexander-Arnold, and you are even then also they haven't got literally the fellow who might be in front of them protecting them is one of them at the minute, and Henderson wasn't playing either to sort of fit in that role. I think we may be in a position where he probably has to go 4-3-3 more often than not. I mean, by more often than not, I mean all the time. I think I totally understand why, because I think I guess neither Jones nor Henderson were quite fit enough to play, and he's also going to have to find a way to get something out of some combination of Minamino and Origi, who both had chances to start in over this week, and neither, I would say, seized that chance. But he just is looking at the inevitability of two of the front three not being available. The front three players, the four of them not being available. It's going to happen, and it's going to have to happen. It's going to have to be enforced by him at times as well that they don't all play. So I understand, but I feel that it was an extra. I think that having Williams and Phillips at right back and centre half, and Fabinho still sort of settling into playing there is disruption enough, and perhaps it was a little bit hard on them to then only have the protection of two midfielders. Really, not as much as Minamino gets around and at times I think probably too much. He isn't able to give them what Curtis Jones gave against Leicester, which was a really mature, composed midfield performance which helped Liverpool keep the ball and win the ball back at key times as well. So I feel like there is so much going on and so much disruption, which can only really be solved by a period of rest, which Liverpool are not going to get. Because I think even when, let's say Henderson's able to start the next game, well, Milner probably isn't, and then we're going to lose. We're going to probably lose as many players as we get back in through the door in the next 2 or 3 weeks at least, and to sort of see where we are from there. I think over that period, I probably think 4-3-3 is going to have to be the way to go.
In that second half, Ali, for me, the fact that there was command, and that's not just as simple as to say, Jordan Henderson was on the pitch, because James Milner had been on the pitch in the first half as well. But it's interesting, you sort of track through Graham Potter's substitutions. When he brings Lallana on, he brings Lallana on to play more in midfield. He wants the extra body by that point, because Liverpool are just, whilst they're not creating an awful lot, they are just penning this Brighton side back. They're not letting them get out. It becomes a lot harder, I think, between 45 and say 65, 70 for Brighton to play football. Liverpool make that really, really difficult for them. And I do think you do see the value of Henderson in there, not just from the idea simply of the leadership, because I think we can end up at times, if we're not careful, damning him solely with leadership. It's with his quality, it's with his presence, it's with his dominance, it's with the fact that he's very big. All of those things really help Liverpool in that period.
Yeah, I think just to take one step back, I think being the people who get rotated in, being the sort of second string, if you like, is beyond the worst position to be in at the moment, because okay, if you're uninjured Van Dijk, or if you're Salah, of course there's extreme amounts of pressure upon you, but you have all of the benefits of all of the practical knowledge that is accrued of playing football games. And so this kind of big squad creates its own problems, essentially. And I think what we see going into the second half is just the figuring out of some of that. And Henderson is obviously a player who we know is not just practically, physically an excellent footballer, but is also is an excellent. He's the glue, and he's able to bring it all together in the second half in a way that is probably psychologically as important. And I think you start to see a bit more of Liverpool being Liverpool, and Brighton start to go, oh yeah, hang on a minute, this is the champions we're playing. It starts to feel a little bit more comfortable to watch, and everything just looks a bit more shapely, and the passing starts to become a bit more confident and a bit more certain as you go through. I mean, I think it's still the case that throughout the whole of the game, it did feel like one where we would hopefully get the 3 points, as Neil said before. Hopefully we would grab them, but it didn't ever feel certain, even in the better passages of Liverpool's play. And you do feel like that Brighton, who are a pretty good side, even then were relatively confident in trying to sort of work through Liverpool, but the solidity returns, and that's why it's so frustrating what happens in the end, because you feel like actually in this game we didn't look great in the first half, but we shaped up, and it feels wrong in that sense that we didn't walk away with 3 points, but
In that second half, Neil, one of the things I think you see is everyone goes 10, 15 yards further forward. I think that, I think it's in part because of Henderson. I think it's also just in general, we've spoken in the past, Liverpool are good at half times. They're good at fixing what's gone wrong. I think someone helps Phillips and just sort of says, if something goes wrong because you're brave and you're front foot and you're too high, that's my responsibility, not yours. So I think that helps Phillips' positioning. But from there, for instance, I think it's noticeable Milner is very far forward on the right-hand side a lot of the time, considering he's right back and he shouldn't have recovery pace. Robertson's up there as well. It feels like everyone else is just more advanced, just more front foot. And all of a sudden, it looked to me like Brighton were just struggling to progress the ball into the area where they wanted to. They were starting from a 10-yard, 15-yard deeper base. And I think that made all the difference.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've not seen any heat maps or anything of that ilk, but I felt Wijnaldum spent a lot of the first half putting out fires and trying to help his teammates when they was in a pickle. And he too was more advanced. At least that was the impression I gained. More advanced supporting the attack, and it became more of the sort of effective strategy that you used to seeing from us. It was disappointing with Minamino in that, again, here's a big opportunity for him and he doesn't really seem to have made an impact on the game. I don't know if we're going to be in a position a bit like we were with Nuri Sahin, where people were always talking about what was his best position and where were we going to get the most out of him. Or even Mkhitaryan at United, he was so good for Dortmund, if only they play him in the right role. I'm not entirely sure at this moment in time what that looks like for Minamino in the Liverpool setup, unless perhaps he's deployed in Firmino's position. But that seems unlikely. He's obviously a really tidy footballer, technically sound. I love his touches on the edge of the box, and he can obviously finish, but we're not seeing him around that area of the pitch. So that was frustrating. But when Henderson came on, we're moving it that much quicker. He's obviously cajoling the side forward. As you say, we shifted forwards. I thought it was interesting how Salah and Jota were able to combine throughout the 90, really. I mean, we could have been 1 or 2 goals up in the opening 5 minutes. It has to be said, and their combination for the goal is tremendous. So I felt like we'd done more than enough in the second half to merit the win. But I think also we have to say that Brighton could very easily have gone in at half time a couple of goals ahead.
Yeah,
we have to be fair, really. They were equally dogged and determined, and they also overcame a lot of adversity, and they've had their star man go off injured too.
Yep, 2 injuries for Brighton over the course of the game. Just quickly, Steve, before we get into our injury with Milner, Jota has been marvellous, to be quite honest with you, and it's a shame that we're not being able to be more focused on that. Really, it's every aspect of his game, to be honest with you, but the finish is again another one that theoretically doesn't look particularly impressive because of the speed in which it goes over the line, but is an excellent, brilliantly placed finish. On top of all the rest of his performance, where I thought he did link up very, very well with everybody. I think him and Firmino are quite an interesting little two whilst they're on the pitch together. I think he's been part of getting more out of Firmino in these last weeks, and I think he's offered a ton of energy to that front line and just a new spark. To be honest with you, he's been like taking off tight shoes.
Yeah, he's in that, and you hope it isn't just a run of form as such, but he's in that zone where just goals come to him now. Either foot with his head. It's like they attract themselves to him, and he is just the man at the minute who's it's just full of goals, and it's been such a success story for the season and such a promising thing for the future, that he's at just the right age to take that next step, become a top European level forward, which I think arguably he already is, because if you do these things and show the things that he's done in recent weeks, then you are at that level by definition, really. Whether that recognition comes from the wider footballing world, I'm not sure, and whether there are points at which sides start to work out what you do to counteract his movement and his quality. Well, I guess there will be, but then we've got other players who that probably creates opportunities for. It's been a real breath of fresh air having him come in, and I think also it was hard to imagine a way that he comes in, is a success, and doesn't displace one of the three. And I'm not sure quite how we have squared that circle, because it's not as if we played all four of them very often. But it doesn't feel like any of them are sort of out in the cold, if you like, including Firmino, who might be the most obvious contender. There's no doubt that Firmino is a key part still of what we do. And that's not just, we'll get his chance in a few. It is that he is still the most likely player to be picked to start for Liverpool. And the manager is, much to Salah's disappointment yesterday, is juggling the game time that they get and managing, the remarkable thing really, which is that they've all, broadly speaking, been fit. I think Mane's had a little bit of a knock here and there, and obviously coronavirus intervened for Salah. But the being able to keep all of those on the pitch is the key to why Liverpool are where they are at the minute. The real upside of everything is, as I've said, is that Liverpool did go top of the league by getting the result they got yesterday, with opponents around them all having tough games over this weekend. So you can look at that positively, or and say, well, at least some of those sides or all of them will drop points, whereas Liverpool have got themselves one. It's just a shame it wasn't the three. But yeah, he's been absolutely brilliant. I think there's just no other way to put it. And I think we're just starting to find ways to. I thought for a while that perhaps he could only play where Mane plays, and there was no real, option there, and that to rotate you might have to move Mane around or not start Mane. I think it is increasingly clear that he can move right across that front three now or play deeper, which is just such a great asset to have.
Milner gets the injury, Ali. It is worth pointing out and worth dwelling on that 2 Brighton players go off injured over the course of the 90 minutes. And the other thing I think that actually happens in that second half is I think that Brighton really tire. They really, really tire, which is to an extent understandable. They haven't got the strength and depth that we've got, and there is a possible argument that our players, through years of training, are a little bit fitter than theirs as well. But also we do because we play well second half, that happens. But the really interesting thing is Milner goes off, and you can see that everyone is pretty vexed by it. But Jones comes on, but not only does he come on, he goes right back, which suggests that Klopp didn't want any further disruption. It was just to change one position at that point, even though he looked scrambled by the injury at that point. But, to see another footballer go down at that stage was just an absolute kick in the teeth.
Yeah, it was. And, I think it's really interesting. It goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about schedule, that I think on reflection and having read the full transcript of the manager's comments, overnight, I think it's really understandable why he's bothered about that and less the kind of VAR stuff that Steve and Neil were talking about earlier, that obviously drives supporters mad. But I think we know how fit James Milner is. We know how strong he is, and how it just says everything that his hamstring goes. And the question is, does anything happen? Are there any consequences here? And that's like a big conversation about what the conversations will be in the Premier League and all of the rest of it. But I think the frustration is well understandable. Is Milner as crucial player on the pitch as Henderson, or arguably in recent games Gini? Probably not, but nonetheless his presence, we know, can determine what happens in a game at crucial moments. So I think the frustration is really understandable. You're trying to get a team that is that has been beset by injury always round. You're trying to get it through the final section of the game, and the person who's probably most able to perform that role in terms of solidifying the team at a crucial period in a match then gets an injury. So massively frustrating.
With just on Milner, what really concerns me is he's kind of like the ultimate band-aid, the ultimate sticky plaster that Klopp's got in his arsenal. If we need to give relief to Robertson, Milner can come in at left back. If we need a holding midfielder, he can be that man. If we need a right back, he can be that man. And I think if he's out for an extended period of time, certainly over the Christmas period, then that has real ramifications for how Klopp can rotate and who he can rest, with the games coming thick and fast next month.
It's the knock-on effect, though, isn't it, Neil? But part of the reason why Milner, and this is the issue here, and this is what's happening, and this is what happens in an injury crisis, is that one leads to another, leads to another. It's a spiral. So Milner's playing 3 games in a week because Liverpool need Milner to play 3 games in a week, and I think that this is where it's difficult, and I think this is going to happen to almost every Premier League team. I think that people are lining themselves up for a nightmarish December and January. To be quite honest with you, I mean, there will be so much wailing and gnashing of teeth by people like Gary Lineker come the FA Cup third round in terms of the selections of the Premier League sides. It's going to be. I'm almost looking forward to it, Neil. I've got it marked down in my diary that there will be some reaping of what has been sowed at that stage of proceedings. But I am expecting all the way through December and January, and it isn't something to take lightly, as Steve said before about if you want to call it the product. We are going to run these footballers to the point that we will be looking at teams that are half made up of reserves by mid-January. Yeah,
clearly, and I mean Lineker with his don't compare footballers to our NHS heroes kind of style tweets yesterday. It's just preposterous, isn't it? These are elite athletes who...
And Lineker's a well-paid professional. You think he'd looked into things, but, he is what he is.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. But these are elite athletes that they're highly tuned and they're serving up a quality of football, a quality of entertainment that we've become accustomed to. And we're simply not going to see that. I mean, never mind the fact that we have to watch a tired Liverpool after the Champions League at 12:30, and then on Saturday night we're served at West Brom versus fucking Sheffield United, which I don't think anyone was sitting down with relish last night. The impact of what we're asking of these players is going to be far and wide, and I think it'll be interesting when we see some of the squads that are limited in comparison to Liverpool. The likes of Sheffield United, the likes of West Brom. When they're fielding what will, I think, be a lot of young reserve players and youth team players, and then when the FA Cup lineups are literally youth sides, then perhaps this will finally dawn on some people what we've been talking about here. But by then it will, of course, be far too late.
The manager looks scrambled by the injury, not least because he knows when that game finishes, he's immediately got to think about Ajax on Tuesday. I'm going to ask you to pick me a team, Steve, but sort of when I say pick me a team, I suppose the question you'd be within your rights to say is, well, who's fit, Neil? At which point we're recording this on Sunday morning and we don't necessarily have a ton of information. I think that I wonder, Steve, whether or not part of, for instance, the Matip plan was that Matip can do 4 of the 5 games, starting with Leicester and ending with Wolves. So we'll pick the 4 that we want him to be able to play and get the most out of him across them. And things like that may well have been ongoing. And there may be the possibility that 1 or 2 could just be on the verge of returning. So if I say pick me a team against Ajax, I know it's not straightforward, but they've got a big break then to Wolves. They can send, if they get a result against Ajax, a heavily rotated side to Denmark or Germany, depending on where that game happens, and then there's Fulham. So my point is that the 16 days between Ajax and Spurs is sort of a wider point, and a lot can change in 16 days. I think he'll want to get through against Ajax on Tuesday night and put that to bed.
Hugely. I mean, what that buys you in terms of, as you say, there's as good a gap as you're going to get in this schedule coming up ahead of the Wolves game, and then if you can make that Wolves be a little bit of an isolated thing among 2 weeks of games that you don't have to give as much to in terms of personnel, literally not have to send people to Denmark for the Michelin game would be nice. So I think I'm going to have to go as. It's hard to say go strong. Well, I mean, you go as strong as you can go, bearing in mind literally who is available. Do you want a team? Is that?
If you've got one for me, Steve, I'd love one. You cut loose. I think he'll play. I think, and you might disagree, I think he'll play Matip and Fabinho at centre half. I think he'll play Robertson at left back. I think he'll want to do Chimikas over the course of the game, but I think he'll think to get this put to bed, he wants Robertson. So my first question to you is, firstly, do you agree with the goalkeeper and those 3 selections I've just made? And what do you think he does at right back?
I do, and I think the big Milner issue is that it doesn't solve his right back problem for midweek, which I think if the back 5 was Alisson, Milner, Robertson and Fabinho and Matip, then I think we're all feeling that's a pretty solid collection of experienced footballers who aren't necessarily all in their ideal positions, but are able to sort of play together. I think given that we assume that Milner won't be available, it becomes trickier. You become tempted to get a little bit, what about Fabinho at right back? but I'm not going to go there because the manager never has, and I don't think he ever will.
What about Jones at right back?
I liked the fact that he put him there. I thought he did all right. Henderson covered for him really well when he had to, because I think Henderson, has literally done it himself, and it is probably seeing the danger behind him. I think he'll go Williams. I think he will go Williams at right back on the basis that the rest of the four are senior professionals. It isn't having to pick him alongside either Reece Williams or Nat Phillips. That being said, I don't know where Reece Williams' fitness is at. Does anyone?
He was on the bench yesterday, so he's fit enough to be in the 18.
I think that in this game he'd be the more natural choice than Phillips. I think he's got, obviously, I think he has got a higher ceiling as a footballer overall, and I think might be less of a I say less of an aerial challenge. I mean, Phillips doesn't come up against someone like Sebastian Haller, in the Brighton game, and does pretty well. So he's shown perhaps that he's a bit more adaptable than even I thought. I think so. I think we broadly come to Williams, Matip,
Neco Williams.
Robertson. Yeah, Neco Williams. I think that's what he'll go with, because I think Neco does well enough when he comes on against Leicester, and I think he'll be able to take some positives out of the Brighton performance, and just want him to go again and just say, you just sort of move past that, not least because it's his second time at Brighton. It's not worked out particularly well in a few months. Midfield is then what? Wijnaldum,
Henderson,
Jones.
Yep. That's
probably the one for me. You've got then a big decision about, oddly enough, you've got one of those nice selection decisions where you've got four of them and you need to fit three into it. You'd have to assume Salah starts, because if he doesn't, then none of it makes any sense to him, which I think is fine. You'd have to assume Mane starts for the same reasons essentially, and it comes down to Firmino or Jota, and I might just be tempted to go with Jota for this one.
Is everybody in broad agreement with Steve? Has anyone got any major concerns, Ali? We go with the Graves outcome.
No, I think what's striking is that even despite the situation and all the things that we've talked about the schedule and about coronavirus and yada yada yada, it's like we've got this extreme problem at the back that is mirrored by a really brilliant options breaking out all over the place as you get further to the front. And so I think we've got good choices as well as bad choices. And I think that there's perhaps a little narrative, about how challenging things are for Liverpool at the moment because of injuries. That is definitely the case in defence, but it's not at all the case going forward. And yeah, I wonder with Williams if actually this is an opportunity, because depending on having had a bad game, sometimes the best thing to do is keep playing, right? So I wonder if there's an opportunity there. But yeah, broad agreement with Steve.
Are you in broad agreement as well, Neil?
I am. Yeah, I think it's a big difference when he'll hopefully have Fabinho and Henderson and Matip supporting him, Williams, with Henderson shuttling across. I think, not that he needs nursing through a game, but I certainly think they can assist him, they can support him. I think I'd probably be tempted to start Firmino. I think that's the only place I'd differ. I think I'd start with Firmino and have Jota on the bench, because he gives so many options. Then, depending on, he can come and cover any of those front three positions. And there's just something about a big European game for us, and just starting with the front three, the tried and trusted, that I think Jurgen often does go back to, the lads he trusts best in these kind of must-win situations. And I do think, a draw is enough for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think he will very much want to get that done and dusted, and then Midtjylland be a dead rubber.
Okay. The one thing I would say to keep your eye out on, it wouldn't surprise me if Fabinho actually starts in midfield and Wijnaldum and Henderson only do a half each with a little bit of jiggery pokery there from the manager. But I think the rest of that's all very, very fair indeed. Listen, it is tough at the moment in a load of different ways, but especially watching Liverpool. But there's loads and loads of stuff on the Anfield Wrap to hopefully offer comfort and laughs because, my God, there are times where the laughs feel in short supply, but we're doing the best for you that we can. The AnfieldWrap.com/subscribe. If you haven't downloaded the app, do so, and then go from there. You can sort it all out. It'll be dead easy. But thank you very much on this Sunday morning to Neil Docking, to Ali McGovern, and to Steve Graves. It has been the Anfield Wrap for you this week. Liverpool have got another point, and until these games get finished today, they are at the very least on the top of the Premier League. It's absolutely astonishing, given everything that's gone on this season, that is the case. And nothing speaks volumes about this side, this manager, and this football club than the fact that they've managed to pull that one out the bag.